All right, hello guys. Just wanted to show you the next step after you've mixed up your plaster and put it in your container to make your plaster blank for carving your sculpture. So this is what it should be after you get it out of the container. Um, as of right now, so I made this about 24 hours ago. You can see there's still liquid on the top, which just means the water's kind of coming to the top, separating from the solid. I can just kind of dump that extra out so it doesn't make a big mess. But what I want to do is kind of get it out of this plastic container so I can start to dry a little bit more. So it's a little bit more solid for me to carve into. When it first comes out, it's going to be pretty wet yet, and you probably want to let it sit out, dry out just a little bit. Not a lot, because the harder it gets, the harder it is to carve it. But you don't want it to be so wet that you like touch it with your, if you're holding it and you squeeze a little too tight, it starts to crumble on you. So I'm just going to go over getting it out of your container so that you can let it dry out a little bit and then start carving into it. So, all right, so here's your container with your solid plaster. So you can use an X-acto knife or you can use scissors, whatever's easiest depending on the container that you have. This has a pretty hard rim here, so I'm going to start with scissors and then probably come back in with the X-acto knife. And just remember, if you're using X-acto knives, you never want to be, working the blade against going in the direction that your hand is. Make sure you're being really safe with that blade and not putting your finger in the path of that blade. So I'm just going to get it started here. And it's okay if it kind of, this plaster's still pretty wet. All right, so I don't know if you can see this, but I'm just kind of going around. Depending on the container that you're using, it might be easier. This is a little bit thicker plastic than, let's say, if you used a milk carton or an orange juice carton, it might be a little easier. And this is still pretty wet. I probably could have let this sit in the container for a little while longer, but for the sake of time, we'll get it out of the container so it can dry a little bit quicker. And you might want to have like some paper towel underneath here in case there is extra liquid and you don't want to get whatever surface you're working on. You don't want to get it too wet and messy. Like if you're working on the kitchen table or something. All right, so I've almost got it there. It's not quite solid enough for me to want to grab the plaster. I'm a little bit afraid it's going to just start to crumble in my hand. So I'm going to cut this as much as I can. And of course, do what I say, not what I do. Don't put your thumb in front of the blade. Another thing is make sure, if you are using X-acto knife, to make sure the blade is nice and tight so it doesn't slip on you. Almost there. Just gonna kind of go all the way around here so I can just pull it right out. All right, so totally destroyed the plastic thing, but I don't need it anyway, right? Remember to recycle. All right, so here is my plaster blank. This is what I am going to carve my sculpture out of. Again, it's still pretty wet, especially on the surface. I'm just going to let that sit out in the air for maybe an hour or two, kind of overnight. Cover it loosely. I just use like a regular grocery bag to cover it loosely just to make sure it stays moist. I don't want it to dry out completely. But this way, it'll dry enough so that I can carve it. Here's the one that I did a few days ago. You can tell the difference I press it with my finger and it doesn't leave a print here. It's like especially up at the top, it definitely wants to kind of squish and deform. So wait until it gets to about this point. It's still really damp. But the nice thing about that is that it makes it really easy to carve. And you might even want it to be drier than this. You've got some tools that you can use that I sent home. The bamboo skewer works really well, just to kind of carve away. You can use the modeling tool that I sent home for the plasticine clay, as well as like if you're trying to dig out like a hole, you can use paper clips, butter knives, spoons. I also sent home a rib for ceramics. So if you want to use that to kind of get a nice clean edge, kind of like just pulling away a lot at a time, you can do that. And then I also have a piece of, you can see that, a piece of screen. This I would wait on using until it's really almost to your finished point, where you have the whole shape kind of carved out, and you are really just like smoothing out edges and cleaning it up and making it look really smooth and clean. But keep this in mind for when you get to that point where it's really drying out and you are refining edges. So I did a few sketches. I was looking around the art room trying to find something that an object I could use to abstract for this sculpture. I was looking at the drill press. You can see I drew some like more realistic drawings of it just to kind of get a feel for the object. And then started doing some other kind of more abstraction, kind of looking at, the general shape of the object. Maybe I could connect this to make it one solid object. So that's kind of what I'm doing here in some of these. I also enjoyed like some of this negative space on the drill bed, where it holds the wood or whatever you're drilling. There's some holes in there that I could maybe play around with the negative space, as well as the negative space in between the drill bit and that back piece of the object. So working from my sketches, what I might first do is kind of come in and look at the shape of my blank. How can I get my idea from paper, a two-dimensional object, to a three-dimensional object? One option is to take a clump of clay. You guys all got sent home some stoneware that you can take a clump of clay and kind of play around with it. Make some like just simple models of abstract sculpture based on your drawings or your object. If you're doing non-objective sculpture, you can, if you have something in mind, you can kind of draw it in with your pencil, kind of start drawing from different sides. Like, what is the top going to look like? Is it going to be circular? Is it going to have a point? Is it going to be rectangular? You can draw on this and then use that as a guide in how you're going to carve it. So that's probably what I would do at this point. Start to draw the general shape where I want that one part, where the drill bit would be, and it kind of connects to that bottom part. I could draw that in here and start digging this out as a negative space. One goal I want, though, is to make sure that this does not end up still having the shape of the yogurt container. I don't want that to be recognizable at all. It should not look like the container that I started out with. It should be completely its own piece of sculpture by the time I'm done with it. So have your plaster sit at least 24 hours in the container that you poured it into. When it feels like it's not going to fall apart when you touch it, you can cut away your container and pull it out of there. Let it dry a little bit more. If it's this wet, you want it to go a little bit longer, until you can hold it without it kind of falling apart in your hands. And then just think about your, if you're doing abstract, think about the object that you're kind of basing it off of. Look at the positive and negative spaces within that object. Play around with it, draw some things out, use a clump of clay to get some ideas. making models, make sure you take pictures of your models if that's the way you want to work, to post into your slideshow so that I can see your progress, okay? And then get carving. So draw on your plaster the general shapes that you want to put in there, and then start kind of experimenting with digging. Try different tools, see what you have around your house, what works well for you. If you find something that works really well, let us know. Maybe somebody else in the class needs some suggestions, or you will think of something that I didn't think of for a tool for carving your plaster. And again, this will continue to dry out as you work on it. So make sure that if it feels like it's getting too dry, you can take some paper towel, get that wet, kind of wrap your plaster, and again, wrap it in a grocery bag or a garbage bag, whatever you have, to keep it wet enough that you can keep carving it. And once you start getting to that point where it feels like you're pretty satisfied with how it looks, you can start to slowly let it dry out more and then come back in. And we'll talk about this later, but we can come back in and really refine edges using the screen to kind of like smooth out any extra lumps and bumps. Okay, so that's kind of it for today. Hopefully that helps. Let me know if you have questions and I can help you out. All right, thanks guys.